No, don't give me 20 minutes. 10, 5, and 3. Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our program, Seasoned Citizens Present. Today, again, we're very happy to be able to present to you a gentleman who has attained more than any of us ever intend to in our life. We have with us today Max Allan Collins, Jr. And because of Dad being with us in the area, we call him Al, although he does go by Max in other areas. Welcome to the show, Allan.
Welcome to you. You don't have a bunch of questions about the Elks Chanters for me today, do you? I hope you've got the right set of questions.
I don't even want to talk. We've done that. Thank you. Allan, again, it's just extraordinary to see you with so much talent and utilizing it, and then here in our little hometown of Muscatine.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much.
You are a local boy, right?
I'm a local resident. I was born here in 1948. Does that make me seasoned yet?
No, only salt and pepper. Maybe.
Okay, all right. And I grew up here, went to school here, went to the community college here. When I attended the University of Iowa, I even commuted.
And still a resident of Muscatine.
So I've always been a resident of Muscatine, and I'm frequently asked about that. Why does somebody who deals with the New York publishing scene and Hollywood and all of this all the time choose to live in Muscatine? And there are a lot of reasons for that.
I imagine you have a good excuse for that, if it's called an excuse. I don't think you have to say it that way, but.
Well, I say I didn't stay. I just never left.
There you are.
There's never been any real reason to. And now that I have a son in the school system, I'm really enjoying that and enjoying the quality of the school system here, and the quality of small town life. I've always liked it. With airplanes and fax machines and long distance telephone, I can do anything I need to with either coast.
Well, again, we're so happy to have the opportunity to visit with you about it. Now, you told us about the education. Obviously, being, again, we'll touch on this briefly, being brought up in a, shall I say, house of music.
Yeah, that's fair.
You were indoctrinated at an early age to music, although I'm sure Dad wasn't forcing the issue to you, but obviously being an instructor in the high school at your early age, music was a primary, and then when he went into the private sector, he still was in the music scene because of the Chanters.
Absolutely. I think I've never really talked to him about this, but I think the thing that probably influenced me the most where music is concerned was growing up around the production of the high school musicals that he did. You know, he was I think he was the first person in the United States to mount Carousel and Oklahoma on the high school level. Those were very sophisticated and ambitious productions. And so I've had a kind of a liking for musical comedy and show music in addition to growing up with rock and roll. Sure. So those two things kind of have fed each other.
Sure. Okay, now, as you said, coming up with rock and roll, obviously, again, I assume most of our viewers are acquainted with the fact that you're also the producer, director, leader, and what have you,
generous.
of a band called, at the present time, Cruisin', which has hit the scene recently because of a return of a gentleman and making a record that you hadn't done for a number of years. Now, that's going to hit the major markets, too, as I read.
Right. The gentleman who's returned is Chuck Bunn, who Chuck and I go back to the original Daybreakers, which was the first band. That band goes back to 1966 and kind of evolved over the years into Cruisin'. Also in that band is Paul Thomas, and I have to say Paul Thomas is the producer, at least of the record album. He's the one with the real expertise where recording is concerned, and we both are songwriters. I wrote about half the songs in the record, and he wrote about half the songs in the record, and Chuck wrote one. Our other member is a young man named Steve Kundle. He's 21 years old, so the band is older. The band goes back 25 years, so the band is older than Steve. Steve has a lot of musical ambition, a lot of musical talent, and is doing some songwriting, and I would imagine that you'll see a Steve Kundle composition or two on the next record, I hope.
Well, that's tremendous that you all get together. Now, just quickly, you're the vocalist and...
I play keyboards. I'm one of the vocalists.
Yeah, okay.
Everybody sings. I probably I guess you would say I'm the lead singer. I probably sing about half of the material, and the other half is divided up between the other guys. Paul sings a lot too, though.
And Paul's the lead guitar, right?
Paul's the lead guitarist, used to be a bass player, and the drums is Steve Kundle, and Bun is the bass player.
Okay. Okay, there we have our format.
There they are, and that's pretty much been the format of the band over the entire run of it.
And you mentioned the fact you've been going for 25 years.
Yes.
So again, this was one of your first ventures into the public world?
Into the arts. Yeah, okay. I was writing all that time, but I didn't actually make my first major sale till 1971, which is about when the first version of the band was winding down. One of the interesting things I think about the band is that we've basically played the same kind of material the entire time. We're a 60s band, and to a degree we play what they call oldies, but at the same time we're doing a lot of original material. Everything on the record is original. That does, I think, bring back the tone and the mood of that particular era. The record is a national record, although it's an odd kind of thing, because in our area it's going to be sold in some of the record stores. Throughout the rest of the country, it will be sold in comic book specialty shops. The record company, Beat Brothers, is specializing, this is only their fourth record, they're a small label specializing in records, rock and roll, that has some relationship to the world of comics. And because of my my fame, if I may be that obnoxious, in that particular marketplace, as the writer of Dick Tracy and the writer of, I did Batman for a while, and a thing called Ms. Tree with local artist Terry Beatty. Because I'm known in that market, this company approached me about doing a record with Cruisin', and so we've been working on it for about a year, and it has just come out in the last 2 days.
You might as well utilize that fame to promote. Now this, if I may point here just briefly, this is something to do with the Cruisin' and
yes,
the record?
This is the CD, and I think we're the first band in the area, I think, and I don't want to brag on something that isn't true, but I think we're the first band in the area to have a CD out, particularly out nationally. Terry Beatty, the artist on Ms. Tree, and he was the artist on the Wild Dog feature that got a lot of publicity around here a couple years ago, did the cover for us, and there are several songs on the record that have a little bit of a relationship to the Ms. Tree comic book. But it's good old rock and roll in the style I think people are accustomed to hearing us play.
Our era, if I may say it that way, because technically our age would coincide with the 60s, and I think that's when we were talking rock and roll back in that era, although you don't really reach that in your own age.
Well, you and I were, before we came on, we're talking about the fact that one of the things that we do with Cruisin', in addition, we play a lot of clubs, but we prefer to do things really like weddings, and it's amazing how this music hits such a wide span of people. As long as you play some slow songs, really the 13-year-old kids are out there dancing, and so are Grandma and Grandpa.
You reach all ages that way.
I think
so. Really, music is, as we have always said, universal. It's a universal language. I mean, regardless of the, sometimes MC Hammer doesn't reach me, but
for me it's great relaxation.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually tend to promote the band a little bit more in this area than I do my writing, because where the writing is concerned, I almost try to keep a low profile, because one of the pleasures of living in a small town is to disappear a bit.
Right.
And so I try not to push it too much, although I'm very pleased that there seem to be a lot of people in the area that do follow my books. And you mentioned the fact that sometimes the books almost all have a Midwestern setting, and sometimes they specifically have an Iowa, even Muscatine setting. And I think people around here get a kick out of that.
Sure. You mentioned your music coinciding with Dick Tracy, not necessarily Dick Tracy, but your comic. Let's delve into that a little bit. When were you fascinated? When did you take over your mind looking at Chester Gould and Dick Tracy? Somewhere along the line that became obviously something of your liking, or you wouldn't have followed through on it.
This whole area of my career, of my life, sounds like a press agent's dream, because Dick Tracy was, in fact, my favorite comic strip when I was a kid, and people that grew up with me that went to Lincoln School with me and Jefferson School with me know that I was an absolute stone lunatic about Dick Tracy, that I haunted cons, Newsland, waiting for the next issue of the comic book to come out, that I collected and that I wrote Chester Gould letters and exchanged letters with him. And in fact, originally I wanted to be a cartoonist, and I was trying very hard in grade school and even junior high to develop drawing skills. But through Dick Tracy, I got interested in mystery and crime fiction, and I started reading Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and Mickey Spillane. By the time I was getting out of junior high and getting into high school, the interest had shifted over into writing. And through college, the drawing completely dropped out. I didn't take any art classes at all. I continued to collect comics and be interested in it and interested in Dick Tracy. But that wasn't my ambition. It even affected, when the first couple of books I published came out, affected those books because there was a character in those books who was a comic book collector and an aspiring cartoonist. And it was that element of those... Yeah, well, to a degree, but it was that element of those novels that attracted the attention of the Chicago Tribune Syndicate, because they had decided, and this is in 1977, and I now am long out of college, and I'm teaching at Muscatine Community College, as a matter of fact.
Right here in our hometown.
And playing with cruising and writing little mystery novels. I got a phone call from them, and they had decided that they wanted a mystery writer to take the writing over of Dick Tracy when Chester Gould retired. They didn't want to get somebody from the comics field. They wanted to get a mystery writer because Dick Tracy is America's most famous fictional detective. So it makes sense. So they began asking around the writing field, talking to agents and editors, and my name kept coming up. Not because I was the greatest writer in the world necessarily, but because, well, you know, there's this guy in Iowa who writes mystery novels, and he's pretty good, and there's always stuff about comics in these mystery novels. So they called me on the phone, and I had the opportunity to do a sample story for Dick Tracy. So now we're coming up on, I think this is 14 years now. So
it's amazing. Now, again, when do you have time for cruising? I mean, again, you've got to have a schedule that's just unbelievable.
No, the entire band is really that way. We have Chuck Bunn, who works swing shift. We have Steve Kundle, who goes to school and takes care of one of his parents' farms. We have Paul Thomas, who's in charge of all the computer programs on Eastern Iowa Community College campuses. Very busy people, and what we do is we try to play just a couple of weekends a month. We do not try to play all the time. In fact, several of the people in the band just refuse. I mean, they say, I won't do this unless we can do it in a reasonable way. Now, we have made an exception this summer because of the record, and we're doing a kind of, in late June and all through July, we'll be making a lot of appearances, including, I think we're going to be doing a concert July 4th on the riverfront, and here in Muscatine, and I know we're playing for the world's biggest beach party at Williamsburg, Iowa, which is a wild event. You've done it before,
we
did it one other time,
yes, I remember that.
And I would say in 25 years of this, nothing compared to playing on that stage for 8,000 screaming people in bathing suits. That was it was great. It was great. We're delighted to be asked back, and we're opening. We've actually this year been asked to play both days, which is quite an honor.
When you're obviously all professional musicians.
Well, we're amateurs, but we're seasoned.
Yes,
seasoned citizens.
Seasoned musicians. Question I was going to come around to: when do you practice? I mean, do you have any time at all to do any practicing of a nature?
Remember that a lot of these songs we've been playing for 25 years.
Yeah, I guess you don't.
If we don't know them by now, you know, heaven help us. And in fact, when we worked on the record, there was an 8 or 9 month period where we actually didn't rehearse.
Really?
We kept the list exactly the same. And when we got together during the week, what we worked on was the record. Now, of course, we're working together, and that, in effect, is rehearsal. But generally speaking, we rehearse once a week. If we have a very, very heavy schedule like this July, we probably won't rehearse in July, because we'll be playing every weekend.
Well, there again, Alan, I think technically when 4, 5, or whatever number of musicians have played together so long, they know each other. They know your style. You know each other, you know what to anticipate. I think there, a firm schedule isn't of necessity.
I agree,
like it would
and
be, in some cases.
and you do compliment us when you call us musicians. I'm sure there are a lot of musicians in the area that might take umbrage on that, but we like to think of ourselves, I think, as entertainers more than that.
Okay.
We like to come in and I hope create something of a party atmosphere.
What you're saying is none of you actually had formal education in music?
Well, actually, Steve Kundal does, and I would say Paul and I know quite a bit, but to compare myself to my father, for example, I mean, he spilled more musical knowledge than I've ever had.
Right, that was his lifestyle. That's what he did for a living.
But he always helped the band too, particularly in the early days.
Sure he did.
He gave us a lot of help on vocals and harmony and all of that. And now I see continually, it amuses me to see all this rock and roll creep into Chanter shows after all these years.
This last one wasn't. Again, we're not supposed to get on that, but this 50
Yeah.
they did was quite very good. And I mean,
Yeah,
very
it was an excellent, one of
right?
their best shows.
Yes. Okay, let's get around to something I discovered in a little bit of a minor research. It startled me. I said, well, I'd like to find out what Mr. Collins has done in as far as producing books and what have you. And I got to 42, and I said, I don't believe that.
Well,
And that was not bringing up, I don't think they had this included, nor this, 42.
well, I think that's probably inflated just a little bit by the fact that that would include various books collecting comic book material and comic strip material I've done. Novels, I believe that Stolen Away, which is the book about the Lindbergh case, I believe that's the 30th novel.
Okay, well,
but there's
my
also
source
been...
didn't offer that. They just said there were 42, and they stopped, and they did not have this in
Is
it.
that right? But see,
They-
there also I've done 2 nonfiction books, and again, there are 4 books collecting the Ms. Tree comic strip that Terry Beatty and I do. There are something like I don't know, 6, 7 Dick Tracy books. So it might even be pushing 50 if you count those. But I think of myself primarily, I mean, you're talking about a lot of the things that I do, but my main focus is as a novelist. I don't think of
that's where
myself
you aim.
primarily as a musician or a comic strip writer. The novels are sort of if I'm doing anything with an eye on posterity, it's the novels.
Vocation, as we spoke of, as being a novelist.
That's right.
Avocation is
Music,
you
and
can't
my
call
day
Dick
job is Dick Tracy.
Yeah, you can't call Dick Tracy an avocation because, again, you've got dog nappers now working. I mean,
Yes.
you have to come up, as we spoke briefly the other day, trying to set this up in your schedule, which wasn't easy.
Yeah, it was a little tricky.
You mentioned then, well, I have a Dick Tracy deadline. In other words, you have a certain area that you must present to your publisher, I guess it would be, or the cartoonist.
Well, remember,
you have to work with them too.
There's 2 cartoonists I work with. A lot of people around here have the idea that Terry Beatty is involved
Yes,
in
I
Dick
almost
Tracy.
made that mistake.
Now, he isn't, although he certainly has the ability to, and the knowledge. But the Dick Tracy artist is a guy named Dick Loker who works in Chicago. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist for the Tribune and was a Chester Gould assistant. And he can't draw anything, nor can Terry, till there's a script in front of him.
So what to draw.
So that dictates the deadlines right there. And generally speaking, unless I'm working around some kind of trip that I'm taking, Wednesday is Dick Tracy Day. That's the deadline day, and by 3:30 that day I have to fax out the script to Dick Loker.
There was recently, now I say recently, it might be, my mind doesn't always necessitate dates precisely, but there was an opening of a theater in Illinois pertaining to the Chester Gould. I guess they had the Dick Tracy show.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You were there.
Actually, what they're doing, and I'm going back next week, I believe, a week and a half. Soon, this is my schedule again. I got to go back to Woodstock, Illinois for the second annual Dick Tracy Days, and they are in the process, and I think the ribbon's going to be cut, of opening a Chester Gould library and museum.
This is what I was referring to. They had obviously the showing when they had Warren Beatty and Madonna and what have you were there, I guess.
No, you're actually confusing it a little bit, but not much. And I was confused because I went to three premieres in 4 days. But Woodstock, Illinois, managed to have the world premiere prior to the official world premiere in Florida at Disney Disney World.
Okay.
And in Florida, that's where Warren Beatty and all of the stars were.
They didn't make Woodstock.
No, but in Woodstock, obviously Dick Locher and I made sure we were there, and Entertainment Tonight was there with their cameras and all the media from all the places
You mean
there.
you've been on other shows?
A couple.
Well,
But I don't usually get to talk this much.
I want you to. That's what I just sit here and listen for. Briefly talking of this latest edition that you have, Stolen Away, that obviously, as you explained to me, isn't necessarily nonfiction. You do work in your characters to the degree, although it's basically about the Lindbergh case. And you felt, I believe, in viewing some of the other programs,
Yes.
that you felt in research through yourself and other people that Richard Bruno Hauptmann wasn't actually guilty of that crime. And I think this is what your book is somewhat based on.
It is, although the interesting thing, I think, is that I didn't have that preconception when I started out. One of the things that's wrong with most of the Lindbergh books, the nonfiction books, is that the authors have set out with some kind of theory or to prove or axe to grind. What I do in this book and in other historical detective novels I've done is I choose some famous crime that is shrouded both in history and mystery. Some crime that is either unsolved or the official solution is one that there's some doubt about.
Still a little shaky on it.
So then I take it and I do two things. I research it as if I were going to write a nonfiction book with that kind of in-depth gathering of materials and interviewing people, etc. The other thing I do is I approach it then as a detective writer, sort of substituting my detective for Sherlock Holmes or Charlie Chan and taking all of the puzzle pieces of the case and trying to solve it, trying to put everything together.
See.
And so it's a combination. Some people call it faction, which is, I don't know if that's a good term or not.
That's a good word.
But the story is basically a true story. But of course, there's a lot of dialogue in there that I've made up, and Nathan Heller, the detective,
There you go.
is,
I want you to mention your
he's the guy,
character.
he's my vehicle, he's the window we look through.
He's your Dick Tracy.
Yeah, he's my, I would say actually, I always think of him kind of as my Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe.
Okay.
And there's two reasons for that. Philip Marlowe, in that the book is in the first person, and it has that, I hope, has that kind of chatty and rich American slangy style that the Philip Marlowe books by Raymond Chandler had. You know, the wonderful metaphors and similes that Chandler did. I would love to tap into that kind of writing.
As best you could, sure.
But Sam Spade, because Sam Spade's really is where this whole thing started, because The Maltese Falcon is my favorite detective novel. And one day I was rereading it, and I turned to the copyright page and noticed that it was copyrighted in 1929, and the thought popped in my mind, as sometimes the best thoughts just come out of left field, was, oh, Sam Spade and Al Capone were contemporaries. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, what if I did a story in which the Sam Spade character didn't meet an Al Capone type, but met Al Capone? So that's where the idea of converging the traditional sort of tough guy detective story with a real historical event came, and I just love doing it.
Now, this is fresh on the market right now, right?
Yeah, it's been out about, as we speak, it's been out a couple of weeks.
Is it? Okay. You also have another book here about Dick Tracy. In other words, you do other than just the continuation of the daily cartoon.
Yes, this is new.
The second book?
This is new, yes. It is the second book. My involvement in the movie was fairly minimal. It was pretty much limited to doing some consulting. However, because I write the strip and because I have a reputation as a crime novelist, I was approached to do the novel based on the screenplay that would be out when the movie was out. And some of my consulting actually came about when I was working on the novel, and I would change things, and the people from Warren Beatty would call me and say, why have you changed this? And I would say, well, I changed it because this doesn't make sense. And then they would go change the movie.
Okay.
So I actually did have a little
were.
bit of input on the movie.
More so than people realize. You didn't
yeah.
get a byline on it, I don't
No, I
believe.
didn't. But on the other hand, we went out with a novelization and sold 1 million copies. And I've never had a 1 million copy bestseller before.
There you go.
So
That counts.
I was then approached to essentially do sequels to the novelization. So while there isn't a Dick Tracy 2 in the theaters yet, There is a Dick Tracy 2 in the bookstores called Dick Tracy Goes to War, and it's set during World War II.
Okay.
And you don't have to follow the strip to read it. If you saw the movie and liked it, you could plug all of those images right into the sequel.
Into it, okay.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is something that was touched on briefly.
Ms. Tree.
Kind of go into that a little bit, will you, Allan, for me?
Yeah, I think of everything.
I don't think everybody's acquainted with that.
Yeah, I think it's too bad because of everything I do, the thing that probably is least known locally is the thing that I collaborate on with a local artist.
Yes.
And part of that is because it is so aimed at the comic book fan and the comic book shop. And we don't have, well, we do sort of have a comic book shop in town. But the Langs, not you, but the other fellow
down, Steve
Lang,
Con building
has something that is something of a comic book shop. And I believe he carries Ms. Tree. There are 3 or 4 of them in the Quad Cities. Ms. Tree grows out of Dick Tracy to a degree because Ms. Tree is a detective, it's a woman detective, and in Ms. Tree I explore the crimes that are sort of too hot for the Dick Tracy strip, which has a family audience. I don't want it to lead you to think that Ms. Tree is some kind of X-rated thing. It might be PG-13. But I deal with, for example, I've dealt with Satanism. The current issue is has a story about date rape on college campuses. So, I mean, we're talking about some strong, current, stronger medicine than I would be allowed to do in the daily comic strip. And in fact, it says on the cover, I believe, mature readers recommended. That means, you should be 13 or 14 years old. I got my son, who's a tremendous reader and the sharpest kid in town, in my opinion. I don't let him read Ms. Tree, but a few years from now I will.
Well, I've met your son, and as I've told you, I compliment you on it. He's a very astute young man and knows what the world is about and knows what's going on. He really does for an age that the young man is in right now. So, well, I'm quite proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that he's a voracious reader. I think that the thing that he and I have the most in common. We have a lot in common, actually. He and I were talking today about the fact he told me that all his bad traits came from me, which I thought was pretty astute. I told him I thought that a few of the good traits might have come from me too. Well, real quickly, I do want to give a little knowledge to Barbara, who is married to you, who has certainly been with you on many of these expeditions, as it were. She puts up with both Nate. Well, not only that, but I think she's contributed somewhat. Yes, very much. Some of these things, not necessarily drawing or giving you, but I mean, just being in the background and offering suggestions. I think she's been very. Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, it's grown to be much more than that. She began by essentially being my assistant on the strip, typing things up for me and so on. And a few years ago, she took over on the Sunday page. There's a panel called the Crime Stoppers Textbook, which is actually very famous. Little crime prevention tips and safety tips. And I had written those for a number of years. I said, gee, I'm burned out. Could you do this? She's doing it. And she's done that. And then starting about a year ago, she's begun working more seriously as a writer. And in the last year, she's had 3 short stories accepted by major markets. How about that? We have another one coming out with them. Yeah, she's got a book. She's in a major book that's coming out this month, I believe, called Cat Crimes. It's an anthology of mystery stories about, each one is about cats. And some fairly big names in there, but her story was chosen to be the closing story in the book. This is a hardcover book published by Donald Fine, a major publisher, so I'm real proud of Barb. Well, Allan, I think our time is just about to cease here, and I do want to again tell you how happy we were to have you with us and go through all these things with us. Well, thank you, and thanks very much for covering so much, because there's a lot of things I do that I don't get a chance to talk about. My pleasure. That I hope we got it all in as we could in our time. Again, we'd like to thank you all for being with us today. We thank you so kindly, and we wish to acknowledge the Commission on Aging for sponsoring, and ask that you do buy some of these books and help Allan out a little bit. Always helps, So, till we meet again, we thank you very kindly.